You're listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast with your host and bourbon-soaked storyteller, Juliette Miranda.
Hey there, y'all. It's Juliette Miranda, and welcome to episode 258 of the Unwritable Rant podcast. I have a bourbon-soaked story for you today about a life reboot and a caravan of amateurs. But first, y'all, bourbon. Cheers. Oh, my good friend bourbon. Always so delicious and so reliable, and never inclined to pull a knife on me. Is that something that happens? Does bourbon pull knives on people? I don't think so. People pull knives on people. And my guy had a knife pulled on him just the other day. Astoundingly, we were not on Bourbon Street, and we weren't holding up a liquor store. Nope. We were just out with some friends, enjoying cocktails and cigars, when this crazy-eyed broad from Mississippi starts yelling at my guy. Her words are kind of garbled and strange, so our initial inclination is just to ignore her, because that's what you do when you encounter a nutcase in the wild. But she wasn't the kind to be ignored, and instead marches across the room to just drop herself down directly in my guy's lap. Another woman trails behind her. Just a sad, belabored woman who clearly hates her drunken friend with every fiber of her being. She pulls the woman off my guy's lap and makes the same apologies to us that she's probably used at least 50 other times that night. Now, none of this is enough to dissuade this Mississippi disaster from engaging with my guy. She wants to know if he's a local and if he's willing to show her the town. And when she learns that he's my husband, she looks at me and she asks me if I trust her. Literally, she asks me this question as if it is perfectly reasonable. Like, sure, honey, I completely trust you and your dirty fucking fingers to manhandle my guy. So when I tell her, no, I don't trust you, she gets a little miffed. And it is at this point when she pulls a hunting knife out of a sheath on her hip like she's fucking Crocodile Dundee. The blade is a solid 5 inches of smooth stainless steel, long enough to get the job done, but still short enough to be legal to carry. She doesn't wave it or hurl it into an apple. She just holds it out to us and asks, "Do y'all like to get dirty?" What kind of batshit question is that? I mean, the only context we have is that death blade that she's holding, so I think the safest answer is no, you fucking maniac. We do not like to get dirty. Thankfully, it turns out that she was just talking about hunting. But she spends the next 10 minutes gleefully describing the wonders of gutting a deer. My guy, meanwhile, goes to pay the check. Our exit was considerably more graceful and less bloody than it very nearly could have been. And for that, I have to hand it to one of our friends, a former Marine who exchanged a few unarguable words with this chick when she tried to follow us out of the bar. So, for all of my blather these past couple of months about being more open-minded and willing to talk to strangers, I have to say, it is oddly reassuring to have my misanthropic inclinations validated every so often, because seriously, y'all, people suck. They do. People just suck. I learned this lesson very early on. And it came courtesy, of course, of all of the time I spent at rock concerts. The romantic in me loves the energy of a concert. You know, the crowd sing-alongs and waving a cigarette lighter in the air, but the realist in me knows better. Being a single chick in the crowd at the height of the hairband scene was a tremendous and terrifying position to hold. If you wanted to get laid, you had about 10,000 options. If you didn't, you had about 20,000 hands to dodge just to get to the beer line. And I'll be completely honest here, y'all. One of the bigger reasons I wanted to be backstage was just to get the fuck off the main floor. Sure, I wanted the rock stars, personally and professionally, but I also wanted a hassle-free place to pee. Of course, the musicians didn't always have the greatest conditions backstage either. Something I really didn't understand until the very first time I joined a band on the road. And I'll call these guys the Alley Cats. Only they spelled it with a Z and quite possibly a tilde, because that's just what dumb hair bands did back then. Through a ridiculous stroke of luck, I had managed to help these guys snag a spot on one of those multi-band package tours. Now, they had the lowest billing possible. So low that their name wasn't even included on the tickets or the advertisements, but it was a huge break for an unsigned band from the Valley. The exposure alone would be invaluable, and their hope was that it would lead to a record deal. And that is where I came in. I was laboring under the delusion that band publicity was a step up from rock and roll journalism, so I finagled a neat little deal with their manager. I joined the band on the road as a working publicist, making sure that every town knew who the Alley Cats were, and they'd cart me around the country for free. It was not a deal in my favor. Not that I cared. I'd recently left my asshole boyfriend, the warden, and I was in between jobs. 2 months on the road was exactly the reboot I figured my life needed. And if I could add that my publicity skills led to a band getting a record deal, all the better. I packed up a duffel bag of clothing and added my few personal belongings to a storage space that I shared with my occasional roommate, Loopy, and then I gathered up every notebook and phone book of press contacts I had to hit the road. Since they didn't have anyone like a record label to shoulder the costs of a tour bus, the band borrowed an RV and trailer from the drummer's family. Technically speaking, this was a Class B motorhome. Really just a glorified camper van with 2 twin daybeds in the way back, a shower that you needed to sit on the toilet to use, and a microwave that took 10 minutes to boil ramen. It was as far from a tour bus as one could get. But the 4 band guys, tour manager, and me all piled on in anyway, all of us excited to begin a real rock and roll tour. It's probably a good thing here if I make it clear that I was not fucking any of the guys in the band. We were all just pals, really, and in that kind of close quarters, more like siblings. Besides, I was fucking a guy in the headlining band. It was through my connection to him that the Alley Cats got their slot on the tour. And I admit, he was one of the reasons I went out on the road. For the first few 100 miles, everything was awesome. I had my very first cell phone, a clunky blue Nokia that essentially had 2 uses, phone calls and the snake game. And it was really only reliable for one of those things. Still, I used it to call everyone I knew to brag about being on tour. And although they probably only heard every other word I said, it really felt like I had achieved something. And the guys, they were jazzed. They couldn't wait to share the stage with their rock and roll idols. This was it. This was the dream. And then we got to Sacramento. We pull into that gig full of glory, ready to slay the crowd and just pumped up. Only it would seem that no one had informed the venue that we'd be there to do that. The load-in dock was locked down hard, and all the honking in the world wasn't bringing out a single soul to let us in. Everyone looks at me, like somehow my Rolodex of press contacts is the magic key we need. But it wasn't the local paper they wanted me to call. They wanted me to call the singer. He was the golden god of that tour, the one everyone wanted to see, and I knew goddamn well he wasn't going to be in the mood to talk to me. I hadn't exactly been honest with the guy about my presence on the road. I'd only said something like, "Oh, well, I might join the guys for a few dates. We'll see." Now, not only did I have to come clean about being a road whore, I also had to call in another goddamn favor because clearly the Alley Cats manager was too fucking stupid to confirm load-in for their first goddamn gig. To the singer's credit, he wasn't a total dick, at least not about the band. He rallied his people and within an hour had our caravan of amateurs backstage where they belonged. I got a less than gentle brush off and a warning to stay out of the way. He really needn't have worried. I couldn't have gotten in the way if I wanted to, and neither could the Alley Cats. We'd only been given access to the load-in area and the stage, and most of that was taken up with the gear and effects for the headliners. We didn't even get deli trays or a dressing room. Nope. All the Alley Cats were allotted was 30 minutes and 96 square feet of stage space to play, which frankly barely contained their egos. But they walked out like pros, and even though the amphitheater was barely half full, it was only 5 p.m. after all, and no one really knew that they were there, the guys still owned it like headliners. I watched that first show from the roof of the RV. I'd been kicked off the side of the stage and didn't have a ticket to sit in the auditorium, so I grabbed a beer and a blanket and crawled up the RV and made my own seat. And I think that's the moment that I really remember the most from this whole tour, because it really was the perfect seat. It was. I saw just enough of the band and the crowd to know that they were kicking ass. 5 songs was all they got, but it was more than enough to win over the audience. They exited the stage to explosive applause, and that, y'all, that's what I loved. I really loved that so much, just seeing really talented guys play great music and knowing that I had a small part in getting them there. I made it a point to not hunt down the singer I was fucking at the end of the night. Far be it from me to cramp his style. Besides, I wanted him to come to me. I knew he would be keeping an eye on the Alley Cats, and I was idealistic enough to think that he might actually be impressed by how I handled the rock and roll life. And I'll tell you, it wasn't easy, as a person or a publicist. Sure, I could lure local writers to the concerts. They all wanted the free tickets. The challenge was getting them to actually cover the Alley Cats. Every 5 miles on the road equaled one desperate call, plea, or bribe to an opportunistic writer. And since email hadn't been fully embraced by anyone yet, I was forced to scour every janky rest stop across the country for a fucking fax machine so that I could send confirmations and guest lists. It worked, though. Within 2 weeks, the band started getting write-ups in local newspapers and fanzines, and it wasn't long after that we started seeing a dramatic increase in the people showing up for their set. Which was great. It was awesome. It just didn't bring in any more money for the band. Now, I wasn't privy to the tour deal that their manager worked out, but I knew it couldn't have been good when I realized just how empty their pockets were. We could forget hotel rooms. If we slept at all, it was in the van. And since no one could figure out how to work the shower hookup in the RV, I learned the fine art of washing my hair in a truck stop bathroom. The guys just ceased showering at all. All of their cash went to gas and the RV, which left us funky and foul and not at all glamorous. Hope has a funny way of masking even the worst stench. And every night, as we fell asleep to the rumble of concrete and hunger, we consoled ourselves with thoughts of more. Still, when we found ourselves rationing bag fries and bisecting chicken nuggets just to make them last longer, we knew we were never going to make it to the Midwest. The band needed money, like now. And since that glorious record deal had yet to drop from the sky, there was only one way to do that. Play more gigs. The band began booking one-off shows on the nights they weren't on the tour. It meant playing cover songs and loading their own gear at clubs instead of amphitheaters, but the free bar food and cash payments eased the sting of what clearly felt like a demotion. That was how we wound up in Minnesota, just shy of the Canadian border, in a nowhere town that had more snowblowers than people. They were holding their annual Arctic in July festival, and the Alley Cats were booked to play, not the festival, but a dive bar 2 blocks away. None of us were excited about it at all. Small town gigs really only go one of 2 ways: completely awesome or horribly awful. There's no in between. It all comes down to the people and how they feel about where they live. Judging by the blood-stained sidewalks and the broken windows, it was pretty safe to say that this was a town where nobody tried and everybody lost. The inside of the bar wasn't much of an improvement. Once upon a time, it had been a lumber mill, at least judging by the stench of wood rot and the sawdust on the floor. A single air conditioner coughed from a gash in the wall, and that really didn't cool anything, it just served to stir up the sawdust. There wasn't even an actual bar. There was just a large freezer against the wall that contained a couple 6-packs of beer and what appeared to be a side of beef. So you have to understand just how brutal it was to walk into this nothingness after having played a 20,000-seat arena the night before. So we're just standing in the center of this room. We're sweaty and we're staring at the empty space on the floor where the band was supposed to set up. And I'm thinking, Jesus, the only thing that can improve this gig is a lit match. This was not the more that we had been dreaming about for the past month. The band, sure, they wanted fame and a record deal, but at the very least, they wanted a stage that wasn't so small they had to turn in unison to play. Me, I wanted a career and maybe a relationship that didn't come with restricted backstage access. This was none of that. Not even close for any of us. The weight of that disappointment just crushes down on us then. And the guitar player? It's always the fucking guitar player. He's the first one to acknowledge it. He drops his gig bag on the floor and kicks a bar stool across the room and he yells, "This is bullshit. We shouldn't be here." The bass player is next, raging about everything from the lack of clean bed sheets to never getting a decent sound check. And it's not long before all 4 guys are shedding every disgust and frustration that they've carried for the past month into the void of this shitty small-town bar. There's not much I can do to make them feel better. So I just stand back and I let them rage, hoping that eventually they will wear out. But they're too wound up, and my silence is just too obvious to ignore. The guitar player walks up to me. He's skinnier than he should be and smothered in CK1, yet still an imposing figure as he lashes out. He's all, "This is your fault. We should never have trusted some dumb groupie. If you hadn't been so busy fucking that singer, maybe we'd have more respect on this tour." I look at these 4 ungrateful fuckheads, and I immediately lose my cool. I just snap and I say, "I'm the reason anyone knows who the fuck you are. You want to know why you're on the ass end of this tour? It's your dumbass manager." Like most young bands, the Alley Cat had turned to a family friend for management help. This guy's big claim to fame was a law degree, which qualified him to read legal documents, but gave him absolutely zero business acumen. It's not that he was a bad guy. He wasn't stealing from the band or anything. He just didn't know what he was doing. Normally, I would never have thrown him under the bus, or RV as it was, but I am livid. So I say, "Yeah, this hasn't been easy for me either. I've been working my ass off to get you assholes press and pick up the pieces whenever your manager fucks something up. And for what? To be called a groupie? Fuck you. I turn and I see that the manager is standing in the doorway. He hasn't said anything, but his expression shows he's clearly overheard everything. And I do not care. I brush past him and keep walking, past the RV and down the street as far away from them as I can get. I needed a break. Just an hour or two of distance so that when I get back into the RV with them that night, I don't plunge a plastic fork into anyone's eyeball. Unfortunately, there wasn't really any place for me to go. That alleged bar was at the end of the main drag, which consisted of a laundromat, pizza joint, and a hybrid gun store and tattoo parlor. I just kept walking until I hit that festival. There wasn't a whole lot to it, beyond the usual deep-fried sticks of fat and carnival games. So I bought a beer and sat down to stare at a log-cutting competition while I tried to sort myself out. I genuinely felt bad about losing it with the guys. They were just venting, and they had no way of knowing my feelings about being called a groupie. Here's the thing. You can call me anything. Slut, whore, psycho cunt face. I don't care. I really don't. But groupie gets me every goddamn time. Because I'm not a groupie. And I never have been. I realize this is very penny lane of me, but it's never been just about the musicians. If that were the case, I could have fucked any one of the alley cats 10 times over. But I didn't. Because there was that damn more thing. I wanted love, specifically with someone who understood just what music meant to me and why I needed so badly to be a part of it in the only way I could, which for me was writing. The more I thought about it then, the more I realized where my anger had come from. It wasn't the alley cats that I was mad at. Yeah, it was brutal being with them every goddamn day in such shitty quarters, and they had definitely behaved like dicks. But I knew they were good musicians, and I was having so much fun and feeling so great as I watched them gain momentum. It was the headlining singer that I was mad at. In the past month, I'd only seen him alone twice, and both times had been begrudging, as in, well, you're here, you'll do. He was the one making me feel like a groupie, and that wasn't okay. The way I saw it, I had 2 rock and roll relationships here, and both were about love, just different kinds of love, and only one had any sort of payoff. So fuck that headlining singer. I needed to go back to the alley cats. My plan was to apologize, first to the band and separately to the manager. And just for good measure, I stopped and bought a giant pizza for all of us with my emergencies-only credit card. Pizza fixes everything, right? Maybe it does. I just didn't get a chance to find out. As I carried that large steaming box toward the bar, my optimism slowly deflates when I see that things are not as I had left them. And my first clue was a big one. The RV and trailer were gone. I drop the pizza on a stump and run into the bar. I am hoping to see something. Gear, cables, crates, something that will assure me that the guys are going to be back. That they've just gone off to hunt down guitar strings or something. All I find is a lone bartender, loading more beer into the cooler, who stops when he sees me. "Where's the band?" I ask. He slams the cooler shut and informs me that the guys bailed. What do you mean, they bailed? The guy coughs and rests his foot on top of the cooler, taking his sweet fucking time to tell me. They packed up and left, girlie. Guess they thought they were too good to play our town. He nods toward the corner by the door and says, "Think that's for you." It's my duffel bag. It's been hastily packed and hasn't been fully closed, so my clothing and notebooks are spilling over into a big pile. On top of it is an envelope. Inside I find $500 in a note, scribbled on the back of a speeding ticket from somewhere in Utah. that says, "Your services are no longer needed," and it is signed, "The Dumbass Manager." Fuck! Here I thought I'd overreacted to being called a groupie. I kneel down to cram what I can into my bag without checking to see if anything is missing. I did it just to be doing something, because once I finished that, I had no idea what to do. Part of me wanted to call the headlining singer and rat these guys out for stranding me in what may as well have been Canada. But I didn't want to take the chance that he wouldn't care. That he'd say something obnoxious like, "Well, I guess that's just rock and roll, baby." I could have followed after the Alley Cats. I mean, I did have their itinerary. Maybe give them a night off to chill and then catch up with them in Duluth or Eau Claire. I had too much pride, though. So instead, I decided to go back to LA. Since there were no cabs in that lumber town, I was forced to wait until the bartender got off his shift that night so he could drive me to the nearest bus station, which was a good hour outside of town. It would have been a nice gesture from a decent guy if he hadn't asked me to suck his cock in payment when we got to the station. And yes, I did decline. Thank you very much. As for the Alley Cats, they finished the tour and were met back in Los Angeles the following month with a small bidding war. 3 labels wanted to sign them. 2 major labels and 1 smaller indie label that had been launched by that headlining singer I left behind. Their genius manager convinced them to sign with the singer, thinking that he would take them under his glorious rock star wings and nurture their success. And he did, sort of. He wrote their first single, which was something of a hit, collected their publishing royalties, and then dropped them from his label a year later. I guess that's just rock and roll, baby. Now, before y'all run away and go find something better to do, I just want to give you a little bit of an update about the Unwritable Rant podcast. I'm sure y'all have noticed that these episodes are coming out a little bit few and farther between, and for that I do apologize, but I wanted to let you know that I'm working on a novel. It is a terrifying and huge undertaking, and unfortunately that means I'm not going to be able to put out these episodes as often as I would like. But I promise you this podcast will continue. You just got to hang in there with me while I work on this novel. My goal is to have something of a draft finished by the end of summer, so fingers crossed that all the bourbon in New Orleans helps me get there. So before I go, I just want to say thank you so much for listening to the Unwritable Rant podcast and following me along in my crazy life's misadventures. It's a hell of a ride, y'all, and I really appreciate you guys here with me. So hope y'all have a great week. I promise I will be back again soon with more bourbon-soaked stories. If you want to catch up on back episodes or relive some of your favorite ones, just go to theunwritablерant.com. I'll see y'all around soon. Cheers.
Go to theunwritablerant.com and sign up to get early access to interviews and new videos. And don't forget to connect with Juliette on Twitter @MorningNeurosis.
Girl, you as pretty as a Sunday morning, standing on the corner at Carondelet. What you say we make our way up to Bourbon, a couple hurricanes and a hand grenade, and get blown away. Let the chips fall where they may. If it's all the same, what you say, bon ton, hey, pretty mama, I can smell the gumbo. Sweetest taste of honeysuckle on my lips. Good God Almighty, I can hear the trombone. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this. Come a little closer, honey, let me hold you. Nothing tastes better than a bourbon kiss. You can be the flower on my magnolia. Every heart ought to beat to a rhythm like this.